Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our webinar today. Titled, you can see it, There's No Place Like Home, Enhancing the DE&I and the Patient Experience with Decentralized Clinical Trials. If we can go to the next slide. My name is Ken and Rooney. I'm going to be facilitating this, this presentation. The program is being recorded, so if you do have questions, submit them in the chat, and we will have time for open Q&A at the end. There is one CPE credit that's available for this session. So in order to get that CPE, you need to be participate during the whole webinar. And then there's multiple polling questions here, but you need to answer at least 3 of the polling questions during this webinar. And then we will be mailing your CPE certificate after 2 weeks to your email. So, and as well as there'll be a survey afterwards. So thank you for joining us. And with that said, I'm handing this over to Marcia Brown-Rayford, who will be leading this with Arquez. Marcia.
Thank you, Ken, and welcome to everybody. So glad to have you join us today. And we're going to hop in because we've got a lot that we want to cover and a lot that we want to share. So we really appreciate you coming around and gathering around the campfire to learn about decentralized clinical trials and how there is a great impact on patient centricity, et cetera. I'm not going to kind of preempt what we're going to talk about, but I do want to introduce our guest speaker and panelist, who is none other than Arquez Starling. He's the CEO of Reveles Clinical Services. Take a step back quickly, and you see my title on the screen. I am the Vice President and Global Head of RGP Healthcare's Life Sciences practice with a focus in pharma, biotech, med device, as well as some of the payer and provider space. Ken, and don't slap my finger, but payer provider space when they conduct clinical trials. So anything from discovery all the way through to commercialization that falls under our purview. And we're super excited about what we do to enhance the life sciences space. I've been doing this since I was a kid, since I was 17 years old, so I like it. And I'd like to throw the mic over to Arquez to just kind of introduce himself. I won't steal his thunder or steal that honor. Arquez, can you just kind of introduce yourself quickly to our audience, and then we'll dive in.
Absolutely. Good afternoon. Again, Marcia, it's certainly a pleasure. Thank you to the RGP healthcare team for hosting and facilitating this discussion. There is still tremendous amount of interest about DCTs and further a need to just align around educating and creating awareness around the benefits and advantages of decentralized clinical trial approaches. So certainly happy to be here today. Again, as you mentioned, as my bio, Arquez Starling, I'm the founder and CEO of Reveles Clinical Services.
Awesome. Perfect. All right. So this is what we're going to talk about. We said this is what we were going to talk about in the promo and the advertisements and things like that. And we're not going to tell any stories here. It's not a bait and switch. We are going to discuss the difference, right, between traditional and decentralized clinical trials. What do they mean? Now, you heard Arquez say DCT, right, that acronym, and some of us know what that is and some of us don't. So whenever you hear DCT, that means a decentralized clinical trial. So we're going to talk about what is the difference between a traditional clinical trial and a DCT. We're going to talk about those digital technologies, those digital health platforms that can assist and help fuel recruitment, retention, diversity, equity, and inclusion, bringing other people around the table to get them involved in clinical trials. And there's a reason for that, right? As well as ways blockchain solutions can help with decentralized clinical trials or DCTs. And one of the key elements we want to raise here is that the focus is conducting these DTCs at home. Think about clinical trials at home, the operations, all of that, right? And then effective approaches to technology interoperability, because we know that there are several technologies that are involved in clinical trials, period, or just involved in any operations, but then oftentimes they're not interoperable. They don't talk to each other. You can't streamline getting access to the data, the information in a seamless way. Talk about ways to do that and the benefits, and then just peppered throughout. Number 5 is peppered throughout our entire discussion with respect to best practices, how we can actually do this better, and how we can enhance the patient experience and patient engagement and some of those strategies. All right. Anything else to add there, Arquez?
Sounds like fun.
All righty. Let's hop in. So now let's just level set quickly. We've heard the term diversity. We've heard the term equity and inclusion, just to ground us. And I'm going to say that I'm stealing a little bit shamelessly from RGP's DE&I council that we have in place. And I sit on that council, so I can freely kind of steal from the, well, it's not stealing, it's borrowing heavily from the council these definitions. When we talk about diversity, right, we're talking, that includes race, color, ethnicity, nationality, religion, socioeconomic status, veteran status, education, marital or family status. We think about clinical trials. There have been some doctors that thought that their patients couldn't participate because they had children. You know, let's think about that. Language, age, gender expressions, you know, gender identity, sexual orientation, mental or physical ability, and learning styles. Then when we talk equity, we're talking just leveling the playing field for access, right? Access, opportunities, and advancement for all, while we all strive, right, to participate. And we want to eliminate the barriers that prevent folks from participating in clinical trials, no matter who they are, where they're from, what zip code, right, what age. And then inclusion, the fair and respectful treatment of all individuals, providing equal access and opportunities, resources, and possibility to contribute fully to successful outcomes. You might say, okay, Marcia, you just read that, and I intended to read that, right? So that we really, really level set on what this actually means and how decentralized clinical trials at home can help address these issues when it comes to health equities and even cost reduction and things like that. Anything to add there, Arquez?
No, I think you hit the nail on the head.
All righty. I guess I'm doing pretty good. So now when it comes to clinical trials, just some quick stats on the number of clinical trials that are conducted around the world. There are about 432,000 clinical trials underway like right now around the world. And this is according to the World Health Organization, right? Pretty credible source. The US conducts about a third of those. And right now underway are about 160,000 clinical trials overall underway in the world. And then you can see, you know, the graph in terms of the next is China in terms of the instance and the volume of clinical trials and on down the list. And then here's some other stats to really just kind of ground us. Of those clinical trials that the US conducts, right, about 160,000, and those are the ones that are registered. There are millions of participants in clinical trials annually. Think about that, millions of participants. So these are patients. We might think of them as subjects, but they are patients. And so the average cost to recruit a clinical trials patient, one patient, is $6,500 just to recruit them, not to take them through the trial. If they drop out of a trial, let's think about this. Remember, there's an economic component here as well. If they drop out of the trial, the average cost to replace them is $20,000. So it's more than 3 times the cost to recruit them. That's just to replace them and to get them involved in the trial. That's average. So we know averages are some above and some below. And then delays in clinical trials, because if we have to, recruit additional patients and things like that for various reasons, a delay and delays in clinical trials can cost between $0.6 to $8 million per day. Think about that, per day in operating costs. And then delays can cost, from a market opportunity and an opportunity cost or a lost opportunity perspective, between $13 and $30 million per day in lost revenue. I really want to ask us, put in the chat, 13 to 30 million per day. So look at the revenue side and the cost side, guys, huge opportunities. It needs to be fixed, right? So we're just providing the landscape for the opportunity that decentralized clinical trials can offer when it comes to helping to minimize these costs, enhance efficiencies, and bring these patients around the table. All right, I'm going to go to the next slide. So, okay, having said that, now we've got this big landscape, big playing field. Arquez, can you tell us what is the difference between a traditional clinical trial and a decentralized clinical trial? What are those key levers and key fundamental differences?
Absolutely. Marcia, one of the things I think it's good for us to kind of level set is that there has been, quite frankly, some inconsistencies in our industry around nomenclature. We've heard, things such as siteless, direct-to-patient, hybrid, remote, and virtual clinical trials. But recently, and I believe it was in 2019, the FDA really strongly encouraged the industry to align on some consistent nomenclature and a description around how we characterize these approaches. So the decentralized clinical trials are essentially defined as studies that execute through telemedicine, mobile, local healthcare providers, that leverage direct-to-patient shipments, and differing from your traditional clinical trial models that are only at the site level. And these decentralized clinical trial approaches really is intended to enable remote data sample collection, including from the patient's home or other convenient locations that reduce the burden on patients and their caregivers. You mentioned the slide before around, kind of the, global landscape for clinical trials. What we know and what we experience with many of our clients as we're engaging, it is incredibly, complex, and there's a lot of competition in certain therapeutic areas. You look at oncology, you look at CNS, and the amount of patients, it is estimated you're going to need about 40 million patients in the US alone to be able to support the projected growth in clinical trial activity. And so really often what we see is through DCTs is like, well, how do you address the most pervasive challenge that we have in the clinical development? And that's really around recruiting and retaining patients. And DCT allows us to be able to broaden our reach, expand our geographical catchment to be able to engage patients that are traditionally limited to participating in clinical trials.
Yeah, I love what you just said, that geographical, catcher's mitt, right? To make sure that we broaden the scope, because we're going to get into some more stats here in a couple of slides. But you mentioned 40 million patients. Think about this. Like, I'll give an example. One, large life sciences company, let's use maybe like a Roche. They had about almost 400,000 patients in clinical trials in 1 year, right? And they're just an example. So large life sciences companies can have up to 500,000 patients. So think about the costs, folks, when it comes to either the loss of patients in clinical trials, if they drop out of clinical trials, the cost to recruit them, the cost to retain them, right? And they are patients. They are not just, again, what we might call subjects in the scientific or the medical world. They're patients having an experience. And so you have to think about what's going to keep them involved, what's going to even draw them or attract them to be involved in clinical trials. So having said that, so what I heard from you, Arquez, here is with respect to decentralized clinical trials, there's no standard definition, but I think folks kind of agree on the fact that, right, the trial is brought closer to the patient, right? It's brought closer to their proximity, closer to their community. Clinical, medications and things like that are brought to their homes. And then, some would say that there's at least one or more digital platforms that are used. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and let me just make one correction. There actually is a standardized definition. However, what we've been encouraged to align on is just the nomenclature, how we characterize these approaches. The other thing is that for the audience is to see decentralized clinical trials as a continuum. There is a shift, obviously, with COVID. We've seen a shift in clinical trial activities, getting closer to patients and being able to enable a constellation of these evolving technologies and services that includes tools such as electronic consent and telehealth and EDC and ECOA, and allowing the investigators to maintain that link, that connective tissue between the trial participants without having to be in person. So
right.
Again, using mobile or home healthcare providers or healthcare specialists to engage in some of these procedures. So again, for the audience to think about DCT as a continuum, you can depending on the type of trial that you have, you can look at approaches that are fully decentralized. Where we see the greatest growth is going to be around hybrid decentralized clinical trials, where they tend to be less complex. The trial procedures require some in-person visits, whether that's for steady drug administration or clinical procedures. And then you see your traditional, where all of the clinical procedures are conducted at the site. So again, really encouraging the audience to kind of think about decentralized clinical trials as a continuum, and the offering is around their clinical trial design.
Yeah, no, I think that's awesome. And what we're going to do is we're going to give a little quiz for our audience to see if they understood that, right? If they kind of, if there was an uptake in the knowledge. So polling question.
So you guys right now showing on your screen should be polling question number 1. How are DCTs different than traditional clinical trials? A, patient patient visits for healthcare providers interactions and laboratory tests are localized in the patient's community. B, clinical study medications provide directly to patient or to local healthcare facilities. C, at least one or more digital platforms are used. And D, they can be conducted at home.
Or E, all of the above.
Or E, all of the above.
Maybe.
And
All right, let's see what you learned.
Great. Yep. Excellent, everybody. E, all of the above. Good
All
job.
right, awesome. Arquez, you're doing super here.
Marcia, can I get and see, obviously the audience is responding well to the information that we're sharing. We're talking about, again, how DCTs are different. The key for us is really that they're not different. There are some elements of DCTs that are certainly not different from your traditional trial. One of the things that I want to highlight for the audience is for the principal investigator, his or her responsibilities overseeing the patient safety per ICH DCP, whether the trial design is conventional or decentralized clinical trials, those responsibilities are not changed. The other thing that I do want to remind the audience is as we think about the two pillars of clinical research, patient safety and data integrity. So really DCT it requires this very careful planning around how you're going to approach the DCTs, looking at your protocol of development and how you're going to ensure data provenance and integrity. So again, a lot of things are not changing. Some of the way in which you draw or you adapt some of these approaches to help you with your clinical development objectives is really important for how you think about your DCT, how to incorporate these DCT approaches.
I think that's a great point. I think that, the ultimate objective is the same, right? The objective is the same. It's just the how now, right? How it'll happen. But I also think that let's hop into these key challenges, because, another thought I was, thinking is, again, if we focus on the patient, if we focus, as you mentioned, Arquez, on that continuum, right, of clinical trials, it should be looked at and viewed as clinical trial care, right? Clinical trial care. And so can you speak to some of the challenges that there are to just general patients participating in clinical trials, period, irregardless and irrespective of the approach or the methodology, as you mentioned? It's not changing, the outcome isn't changing, but now it's the approach and the how. Can you speak to some of these challenges?
Yeah, so again, what I'll first say is that, again, some of these widely known challenges are really, disruptive in many regards. That if you look at, again, some of these unrefutable facts around terms of access, 70% of patients living greater than 2 hours from the research site. And if you think about an average clinical trial requires about 11 visits is what is estimated. And so that can translate into thousands of dollars in childcare, lost wages, travel expenses. And all of these things can ultimately create barriers or for patients to participate. It could be, very cost prohibitive for many. And so if you think about, again, some of the most pervasive challenges that we have is finding patients and keeping them in the trials. 30% of, is the dropout rate for patients who sign up and drop out of your clinical trials that before they even complete. So again, trial accessibility or inaccessibility stifles the development of these life-altering medications and contributes to higher costs. It contributes to delays for clinical trial sponsors. You mentioned some of the things in terms of lost revenue. Every day that those trials are not actually moving forward or not helping reach their commercialization goal has a very meaningful impact financially to sponsors. So evermore, I think there is such a premium and a precedence on speed. And so one of the things that that we're trying to really address with these decentralized clinical trial approaches is being able to engage patients more quickly and being able to obviously collect data faster. So that's really important to highlight.
I think that's super. It's the access and the speed. And guys, think about 80% of clinical trials are delayed in the US due to recruitment challenges. 80%. Remember that those figures we gave, those economic figures, those dollars, that cost, that burn, 80%, right? That's huge. 30% of clinical trial patients drop out. Remember the cost to replace them, right? Just think about that. And then there are tens of millions, of hundreds of millions of patients. Basically start calculating that cost and the benefit to think about, taking clinical trials to the home and decentralizing them to that level, right? And then I want to make sure we hit this one. Greater than 75% of respondents to a survey said that, hey, we'd be happy to collect our own data at home, right? And have nurses to come to their home for clinical studies. That's very telling, right? So now, we just want to just kind of paint this picture. All right, time for another quiz.
Great.
See if we got it.
Yep. The next question is, you just saw the answer on the screen. What percentage of potential clinical trials participants live over 2 hours away from their nearest clinical study site? 70%, 55, 40, 25. It was, note to self, it was in the upper left-hand corner box.
All right. Over 2 hours. They live over 2 hours away from the nearest clinical trial site. How prohibitive would that be to participate and to continue participating? What do we have, Kenan?
Yeah, hold on. Let people answer.
Gotcha.
Great. Yep, that's right. Everybody, 70% is the answer.
Okay, there you go. Yep, 70%. So for those that didn't quite get it, it's 70%. It's a big number, right? It's a huge number. And so it's something that can be addressed in decentralized clinical trials. And so, then what are the advantages? And you've already shared some of these advantages, our kids, as we were talking, but if you were to do a little pick list on this list of items, you talked about faster, trial recruitment and just, acceleration of executing on those clinical trials, enhance, patient diversity and access. Which one would you want to drill into a little bit here and just talk a little bit more about in terms of the advantage of a decentralized clinical trial model?
Yeah, happy to, Marcia. So one of the things before I talk about some of the advantages, again, kind of going back, the lack of geographical convenience to clinical trial sites hinders study participation. We know this, particularly for rural residents. So when we talk about diversity, we're not just talking about ethnic and racial diversity. We're talking about age. We're talking about gender. And sexual, and even some considerations, sexual orientation. And so these things are really important because even more the density of our population and regions in the US, there was a recent statistic that indicates that about 50% of all FDA approved studies in the US were conducted in 1% to 2% of the zip codes. So again, geographical density really contributes to why patients are unable to participate. So then what are the advantages? So if we think about the advantages to be able to implement DCT approaches that is reducing some of the barriers for study participants and their care providers to participate, the advantages are pretty clear. So one of the things that I wanted to do is think about the different stakeholders. For patients, the advantages are pretty salient. DCTs offer those patients an opportunity to engage in clinical trials and fit the trial into their lifestyle as opposed as into, the lifestyles of, or the confines of the site. We've seen demonstratively that patients have higher satisfaction, even in your poll question. 75% of the patients would be open to participating in clinical trials if they were a decentralized clinical trial approach. Also, from a patient perspective, is being able to see higher retention and reduced travel and associated costs for transportation. These are all very documented and well-known advantages for patients. But let's talk about for sponsors, those who are conducting clinical trial sponsors, those that are conducting the trial. The advantages are, again, very salient. You get access to an expanded pool of patient participants that you likely wouldn't have been able to access in a traditional model. The decentralized clinical trial approaches have been able to prove quicker in recruitment times, in some cases up to 50%, being able to speed up your recruitment process. Again, higher level of retention, which there is intrinsic value to being able to retain patients and to collect the data faster. And in some cases for sponsors, there've been some evidence to support improved patient compliance and adherence. And there are some ever-growing evidence around lowering lower cost per patient. But I think for sponsors, I think the jury's still out around kind of the cost effectiveness, but it does really improve your enrollment rate. And then last but certainly not least, for an investigator, thinking about your advantages, the access to, again, an expanded pool of patients, being able to build some capacity for your teams. So because many of those procedures are actually being done outside. And so a number of reduced clinical visits are some of the advantages that we've seen with, from a PI perspective.
No, I think that's super. And if we cross between the investigator and the patient in terms of a benefit, clinical trials also offer an opportunity for patients to participate in therapeutics that are not yet on the market. So it's healthcare for them, another form of healthcare, for them as well. So for a principal investigator, who is the doctor, right, the physician that's leading the clinical trials, for them to be able to offer alternative solutions to their patients. And now it doesn't matter what zip code they live in, right? They can have access, because now you're talking direct to home deliveries and things like that, the home administration and direct to patient delivery. So, I think that the advantages are absolutely, phenomenal for all those stakeholders, including the sponsor. That's awesome, Arquez. Let's go to the next slide. So another poll.
Hold on. Great.
What is one of the major pain points that DCTs address and solve? Select the best answer. Kenan, I stole your...
That's okay. You're doing great. I thought you might want to drink water. Go ahead and drink some water.
I stole it. It wasn't nice of me. I'm just so excited to see how we're learning. So what is one of the major pain points that DCTs address and solve? Select the best answer. It's a single choice. A, access to clinical trials and otherwise unavailable treatments for rare diseases and other illnesses. B, low clinical trials patient dropout rates. C, affordability of high cost medicines. D, high interest rates. Maybe they can help you with your mortgage. Or E, all of the above. Select the best answer. The best answer. The best answer.
Great. Might want to spend a little bit of time here.
Yeah. Okay. Well, at least nobody mentioned high interest rates. And so I get why we say low clinical trials patient dropout rates, right? Yeah. So at the end of the day, we don't want to, dance around the mulberry bush here, but the best answer is A, right? The problem, the major pain point is not low dropout rates, right? That's right. That would be a great thing, right? So it was a trick question for those that answered B. But at the end of the day, access to clinical trials and otherwise unavailable treatments, et cetera. And so good job to the team. Okay, let's go forward. Let's go forward. Let me close.
Hey, Marcia, can I ask a question real quick?
Yes.
Question. And by the way, we're halfway through the
Yep.
At the bottom of the hour.
Absolutely.
Can you guys give me a sense of the mix, and just that's a swag I'm looking for, of what percentage of these decentralized are done at a home or through a wearable, or at, you called it a patient community or some like a healthcare facility? What's the mix when you say decentralized? Is it most yeah, I'm just curious what that is.
It's a really good question. Unfortunately, I don't have the specific data on that, but what we see is, really that many of our sponsors are evaluating these different approaches, where they're designing their protocols to reflect a menu of these services, which it could include home, which could include remote, remote access and locations, or even having local healthcare providers to be able to come and support specialized assessments and screening and things like that. And so I believe, and again, there's been a few industry surveys out that are polling the industry to get a sense that the general industry will continue to look to incorporate these types of these types of approaches, but it will be a menu of services is what we're thinking.
Yeah, and there was a response in the chat that said,
Yeah.
yeah, most of, thank you, Jesse. Most of it is done in home, sometimes with the use of home health nurses. So, and actually that's, I'm sorry, one more question on top of that.
Yeah.
You talked about these wearables and these, these digital platforms and then this at home. So like, I'm just trying to think operationally that someone's got to send and mail these wearables to their home and then the tracking and all that. It's who's on the hook for all that? Like that kind of infrastructure.
I think that brings us into the next slide, actually.
Okay,
I believe.
Sorry,
That's a great question. And Jesse, thank you for that comment, because we have clients that are now moving into developing their strategy for DCTs. So it's kind of going to look a little bit of a hybrid, and there's going to be some, cross-pollination across, traditional DCTs and then somewhere in between in the middle. And as the industry kind of matures in this area, some of those categories will become a little bit more distinct. But right now I can understand why the metrics aren't extremely fully clear, but we want to see it move in the direction where it's much more convenient for the patient and they can have their choice, like Amazon Prime, they have their choice on what they bring home, right? Versus, going and visiting, doing a patient visit. And of course, the benefit of telemed and telehealth, et cetera. That brings us straight to this point, Arquez. How do digital health and other technologies fuel clinical trials? Recruitment, retention, all of the other enablements, patient centricity, but particularly from the standpoint of those at-home clinical trials and those at-home, if you will, call them DCTs. How does that play? And then you can maybe also answer Kennan's question about the logistics around that.
Yeah, no, again, there have been certainly some positive things that as a result of COVID, right? And so the COVID pandemic really illuminated the industry around being able to quickly adopt these digital solutions to ultimately improve the process for finding patients and pre-screening and enrolling patients in the clinical trial. There have been, again, tremendous amount of technology improvements around really enhancing the patient's experience and helping accelerate the enrollment process. That includes things like pre-screening, using artificial intelligence for patient recruitment, where you're, really leveraging the usage of AI or natural language processing for technologies to basically evaluate patients' eligibility and criteria. So there are many examples of where we're leveraging these digital solutions to really help, with whether it's patient recruitment or the overall making engagement seamless. So it's pretty exciting to continue to see the adoption across our industry for digital technologies. But it's sufficient to say that this adoption by itself alone isn't enough. We will still require a tremendous amount of human intervention, and there's a human element that we will continue to be required to support, overall, again, it's just change management and being able to increase the adoption of these tools across our industry.
Speaking of the tools, Arquez, if you could speak to, you mentioned some of these acronyms that some people may know about and others may not, but like EPROs, right? E-consent, various types of wearables, EDC and remote monitoring. Can you kind of speak to some of those and maybe in like 1 minute? I know it's like a crash course, but in like 1 minute, what is an EPRO? It's electronic.
Yeah, electronic patient reported outcomes again is and by the way, one of our industry groups, ACRO, actually has created a great resource and toolkit for DCT that really provides clarity around some of these, and providing, again, definitions and descriptions of how we as an industry should be aligning. But electronic patient reported outcomes is generally a process that leverages a mobile application where patients can go into these applications or software solutions and be able to input their own information, whether that is the time that they took a medication, or whether it's being able to provide responses to adverse events, or being able to answer, certain questionnaires or assessments, being able to allow that patient to input that information directly into an application is a part of, an electronic patient reported outcome.
Yeah, and then patients, like 75% of them said they'd be willing to do that, right? They'd be happy to do it, and it just kind of enter their own information. Let's now talk about blockchain, right? And decentralized clinical trials, and what are ways, just maybe a couple of 2-3 ways that blockchain solutions are changing how DCTs are conducted at home.
Yeah, well, can I address one of the things? There's largely in the industry, there's still a little bit of what I would characterize as a myth around the adoption of technology. Many people will make comments about certain age groups, not being able to certain perceptions around certain patients will not be able to use or understand how to use the new technologies. It's largely a myth. Research is finding that these patients, including older patients, are very familiar with technology than we give them credit for, and they're eager to comply. And that many of them will make key decisions on what technology they will use and provide, and we need to be thinking about how we provide support to them. So again, taking an opportunity to be a little bit evangelical is that these solutions can be smartly deployed, but again, it will require a fit for purpose. So when we think about blockchain, which I'm really excited about, one of the things, the way I best kind of characterize blockchain is a software technology or a software application that enables trust. There is obviously a much more technical definition, but it represents a radical new way to think about how we are enabling trust. And Marcia, not trusting Arcaz because I'm a good guy, but being able to trust that we have a technology solution that has computational trust by leveraging distributed ledger technologies. And so what we are very evangelical about is being able to leverage blockchain to enable independent proof and verification of records, being able to offer that there are safeguards in place around the documentation of the data and the process. And so again, it's a much more advanced way and a sophisticated mechanism to really truly authenticate things like digital identity, the data that is being put in the platform. And then more importantly, what blockchain technology offers to our industry is that you get to have the benefits of crypto security, and that everything that's done on the actual application is time-stamped. The data is immutable. I mean, you cannot change it, and that the records are, again, they're safe, and that the information is controlled and by leveraging these advanced technologies.
Excellent. So, and I will just throw this out, and then we're going to run to the next slide. But when it comes to the validation, right, of those technologies and the compliance, those regulatory compliance of those technologies, I'm sure blockchain can contribute to those elements as well. And so, okay, well, thank you for that. Was there another point that you wanted to make? I'm fiending to say something about.
I do, because, well, there's a couple of things. One, when we talk about blockchain, we typically don't lead with it because we get kind of two reactions, right? We get people either, wow, that's cool. I have, a working knowledge and understand how you're leveraging it and deploying it in a clinical trial setting. And then the other kind of reaction we get is generally people kind of roll their eyes and say, hey, I may have lost a lot of money due to Bitcoins and things like that. But what we like to really promote is that blockchain allows us a way, again, to really create an environment where we're addressing the element of trust. When you think about decentralized clinical trials, it introduces a whole unique set of challenges from clinical data and documents that are being collected and stored by or stored in and exchanged with increasing number and a variety of stakeholders. So blockchains allows us to ensure the integrity and the authenticity of those research data. And then you have obviously the benefits some of this crypto security that's supported from the general architecture. So without getting
That's
too,
super.
kind of
No,
technical
you're
about it,
good. Yeah.
but again, it really does promote a way to reinforce trust, but also to ensure higher data integrity.
No, that's awesome. So with that, we're going to do a little our next poll. What I wanted to hop on was when you talked about, age and more some of our more senior demographics. And then you have others, like a lot of apps are around Apple platforms, right? When you've got folks with Androids as well. So thinking about that inclusivity kind of thing can give a lot of examples there. All right, poll number 4. Kenny, you want to take it away?
What are examples of digital health and other technologies that enable decentralized clinical trials? So wearables, e-consent platform, e-pro, which we just talked about, telehealth, telemedicine, electronic data capture and remote monitoring, care automation and optimization tools, are all of the above except F.
Which is the best answer? Only one choice. You can play the Jeopardy music. I might sing it. Kenny, you can sing.
Yeah. There we go.
What do we have?
Can you see this?
Hey, 100%. Good deal. Awesome. Awesome. That is exactly right. So you can see this is not a comprehensive, exhaustive list of those digital health technologies, but it gives a sense, right? And then when you think about that, let's move to the next element here, because when you think about those technologies, can you help us here, our kids, when it comes to interoperability, right? You have all these platforms, you have all these systems, you've got data and things like that. What are some effective approaches and benefits to technology interoperability in DCTs or decentralized clinical trials? And quite frankly, what does that actually even mean, interoperability?
Yeah, I mean, interoperability or system interoperability is a term where we're being able to integrate with modern technology, whether that's open APIs, RESted APIs, through FHIR or integration. These allow us to either exchange data and information, whether push in information or extract information out of disparate systems. This is probably one of the biggest areas of friction in our industry because we have so many software applications, whether that's startup solutions or EDCs, electronic data captures, clinical trial management systems, or even things like randomization and trial supply management systems. All of these systems are different and perform different and have different level of connectivity. And so what we as an industry should continue to do is move towards how we can begin to create levels of easily to integrate these systems and to drive towards an interoperability. That is probably one of the biggest areas for us to evaluate and continue to support the growth of DCT is the lack of interoperability between systems.
Gotcha. But if we're able to one day just kind of reach that North Star, that interoperability North Star, what would you say are like the key benefits? I know we have like a list of them on the right, but which would you cherry pick to say, would be some of the more higher contributors, right, to getting to better when it comes to decentralized clinical trials?
Well, I think there is a lot of interest with integrating with the electronic medical records or EHR systems right across the industry. There's obviously been some examples or evidence where that's been successful, but at large, there's still kind of this black hole where you do not have integration between the many different systems that are out there. So that would be certainly a starting point. The other piece is around, again, kind of integration is for me, kind of going back to the blockchain aspects of this is really the kind of the practical magic of blockchain technology is that it's really not, well, yes, there's some, obviously the intrinsic benefits from data and data provenance, but also what could be is the peer-to-peer network where you can incentivize patients to keep their own health records up to date, and that through smart contracts and tokens and things like that. And so those patients will be able to take that information and have that readily available, whether it's on their phone or in an app, or where they can move forward in that. And so that it doesn't necessarily require you have interoperability between those kind of legacy systems, because those patients are being able to carry that forward. And so again, pretty exciting, me being a little bit Pollyannish about the future, but I think that's where we would see some great opportunity.
No, I think that's super. And it's going to be a journey, right? As with everything else, it's going to be a journey, and there's going to be a profile and a gradient with respect to the maturity of our interoperability. Let's go to this, and we're going to get to that question. We had a beautiful question to come through, and I love it. And we're going to answer it in just a moment. Let's do this poll quickly. Kenan, poll number 5. What are some known barriers to organizations implementing DCTs? Single choice: poor or inadequate focus on the patient experience, suboptimal data quality and management, lack of validated virtual technologies and system interoperability, failure to understand and appeal to the principal investigator or the principal investigator's experience and needs, A and C only, or all of the above. Let's see what we get here. Let's see, do we have other questions? What are we getting, Kenan?
Hold on, we're not at 50% participation.
Not at 50%. All right, guys. Do I need to sing the Jeopardy music again?
Yes.
Maybe I'll sing Janet Jackson this time. Is that helping us to get more of our respondents in?
And Marcia, perhaps maybe in all fairness, we didn't really cover this in the last kind of question. I'm happy to kind of dive deeper in it for the audience. But again, we've got folks, most folks got it right, but again, there are some really very meaningful barriers, and I'm happy to talk a little bit more about. So.
Got it. Okay, perfect. Good job, guys. Good job. Failing to understand that. Yeah, the PI, there's a perspective from the physician that conducts the clinical trials as well. So Arquez, you did kind of speak to those 3 sets of stakeholders, right? You're talking to the patient, the sponsor, and then the physician or the doctor, the principal investigator, and what their experience is. Did go real deep, but yeah, there are things to think about from their perspective as well. All right, awesome. Let's go to the next slide, and then we're going to answer that question. And this is the last polling question. Where are you in your decentralized clinical trials journey? If you are on your journey at all. Not started, but plan to do so internally, not started and need help, started and doing so internally, started and using outside help, don't plan to conduct DCTs at all. And I think, Jesse, we probably have your answer because you shared it in the chat earlier with your comments. So that was very helpful. Thank you for that. All right. And after this, we're going to move into our Q&A. Where are we, Kenan? Got it. Not 23% not started, but plan to do so internally. 15% not started and need help. Started and using outside help. Don't plan to conduct DCTs. Got it. Thank you so much for that. Appreciate it. Awesome. And so with that said, I think we can move into answering the first question that's in the chat. And Kenan, do you want to read it, or should I?
Go ahead and read it and send answer.
Perfect. Okay, the question came from an anonymous attendee that asked, are there examples of clinical trials or DCTs that are implementing blockchain technology to keep the information safe?
Yeah, well, we have obviously examples and evidence of where we're leveraging Reveles's technology to support the clinical trial activities that we're engaged in. And again, obviously we can't disclose the name of those projects, but nevertheless, this is an area where we see a great source of differentiation. Is we're somewhat kind of the famous quote of Wayne Gretzky is to skate where the puck will be as opposed to where it's at. We're betting on the future that with continue adoption and the projected growth and interest in DCT, really one of the areas of differentiation will be around data and data quality. That's why we've made, kind of meaningful investments in our system architecture.
It's helpful. Was that helpful for the person that asked the question? Any other follow-ups on that? And I think that's super. And if there's any support that's needed in that regard, you guys know you can reach out, and ask additional questions, because it is a journey that there's a certain percentage, I think around 15% or so says, hey, we're not started yet, but we're going to get started and we need help, right? So if there's anything that's resonated here with respect to where you are on your journey, we're here. We love this stuff, and we want to see it, grow, and it will, right? This is not just a fad that just kind of, comes as an impulse over time, but DCTs are going to continue to grow. And of course, there's so many economic benefits around it, financial benefits around it, even with respect to, again, patient centricity and bringing more into clinical trials, because many of them fail. 87% fail because of, having insufficient number of patients involved in those trials. And so DCTs are going to help enhance that. For the person that asked the question about clinical trials and DCTs and ways implementing blockchain technologies helping keep information safe, did that answer your question, or do you have a follow-up? And or are there any other questions, considerations, comments?
Marcia, can I just make a comment for
Yes.
those that responded to the poll that
Yep.
perhaps maybe are considering but not yet? Again, one of the most undervalued aspects of DCC is, again, the change management piece. It really does require a bit of a mindset or a mindset shift for many organizations, because it appears to be a different way of approaching your clinical trial design, but really it isn't different. It should be thought about again, how you can really evaluate how you can design your protocols with well-designed protocols to be fit for purpose. Education is really the key. For those that are here today, this is one step in that change management where you've identified that you want to better understand these different approaches and how these different approaches could be valuable in supporting your clinical development projects.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point around the change management aspect, right? Because it's going to shift how we implement on clinical trials. It's going to, maybe change some of our technologies and enhance some of our technologies, or bring some, advanced technologies, and shifting, of course, some of our mindset from just patient subjects to being patient-centric, and from being protocol-centric to being patient-centric, and to think about those PIs and even the sponsor companies and cost efficiencies and the cost of trial delays, and thinking about that across the continuum instead of, I know in life sciences, we can tend to be very siloed. I'm sure life sciences is very unique in that regard, right? But we can be very siloed, and to think about the impact upstream and downstream and where we fit, within that continuum, and think about things from a fit for purpose basis when it comes to the patient and what works for the patient, to participate and to help enhance the advancement of medicines and med device development. All right. I know that was a mouthful. Any other points, questions, considerations? We might be able to give a few minutes back, and we'll be a couple of minutes richer in our lives.
Marcia, can I just use a few minutes to talk a little bit about, I would be remiss if I didn't highlight again, thinking about, the how DCTs has impacted the sites. Again, at Reveles, we are incredibly attuned to being a collaborator around DCTs. I believe, again, this is kind of my independent views, but DCTs have largely been done to the site as opposed to being done with them. And so I think we need to think about how we can work with the sites, because we've used terminologies about eliminating burden to the sites. In some cases that may be true. However, there have been evidence where it introduces a whole different level of challenges and oversight that's needed for the sites. So I would, again, just kind of remind, if there are colleagues from the sites, that again, DCT should be intended to be done with you in collaboration, as opposed to being done to you. And we really do need and require the support of the sites to help us move forward with the adoption.
No, thank you for that, Arquez. That's a great point. And then maybe that spurred another question, which is from Ann Berg, who asked for the term fit for purpose to be defined. Can you define fit for purpose, Arquez?
Yeah, so what I mean by DCTs is, again, it's not a one size fit all solution. Every project should be assessed independently in context with the need, the value, and the return. So for instance, if you're doing a muscular dystrophy study, and we know that these patients have mobility issues, right? They're geographically dispersed. They tend to be smaller patient populations. It's a rare disease. What I mean by being fit for purpose would be is you would look at your clinical trial, and does it make sense to incorporate having in-home support where someone comes to the home and provides, whether it's assessments or IP administration or a specimen collection. So again, thinking about how you reduce that dependency on that patient to have to travel when many of these patients are unable to travel, and it's very difficult for them to travel. So that's one of the ways when I think about fit for purpose. Again, when I launched this company, I was with McKesson and engaged in many clinical trials there in oncology. Many people said the DCTs would never work in oncology. I can assure you that there is evidence where you can adopt DCTs approaches to certain therapeutic areas, including oncology. So again, I hope that helps with the fit for purpose question.
Perfect. I think it did, but let's see if it helped. Anne, can you put a yay in the chat if that helped?
And if it's insufficient, I'm always happy to take a call, or we can take it offline.
Absolutely. We have 2 more minutes. And so she said, yes, perfect. And then Mariana said that this was very insightful, a great webinar, a lot of room to find efficiencies in this space. You are absolutely right, Mariana. Big hugs to you. Thanks for coming around this virtual table. Awesome, awesome, awesome. Thank you for your comments. And of course, Arquez, I'm not sure if you can see the screen, but Ann Berg, regarding the fit for purpose question, she said, yes, exclamation point. It did answer her question. So that's awesome. Good deal. I think with that, and with Mariana's wonderful comment and complimentary statement about the session, Kenan, it looks like we can wrap up, and yes, we can all enjoy the rest of our days. I think Sherry just mentioned something. Are there any ties you're seeing with DCTs and ECG reporting? Sherry said no need to respond, but feel free to wrap. So yeah, that's something to think about. Let's just take that as a goodie bag for us, right? To think about DCTs and ESG, right? Environmental, social, and governance reporting from a corporate perspective, and some regulatory requirements are changing. Regulatory guidances, right, are changing. We're going to be moving into a place where they're going to be, some additional elements around what the FDA is requiring when it comes to DE&I in clinical trials and how DCTs can actually help that. Maybe that's the subject of a follow-on webinar.
Absolutely, we need a whole nother hour for that one.
A whole nother hour.
I could talk about that as well. So.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Arquez. Folks, can you just say thank you to Arquez in the chat? We really appreciate you being with us. Valerie Schaefer said thank you so much for a very insightful webinar. You're so welcome, Valerie. Thanks for joining us. And with that, I think we'll just go ahead and adjourn. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Thank you for being with us. Take care now.